duodenal switch, or biliopancreatic diversion procedure, is not one that I personally perform, although I do care for probably a dozen or so patients who've had it done by another surgeon who's since retired. And I've learned a lot from watching these patients' experience, as well as from my my obviously reading and understanding of the surgical literature. But I think it's really important as we go through this talk that I make the concession that I am not a duodenal switch expert. I have not done this surgery. I have not taken care of these patients in the immediate postoperative period, and my only real experience comes from my reading and from caring for about a dozen or so people over the last five or more years. So the anatomy of a duodenal switch procedure is kind of somewhere between, like a cross between a sleeve gastrectomy and a gastric bypass. So you can see right here, this portion of the stomach is removed, and then just after the stomach joins the small intestine, it's divided, and you end up essentially with the same Y construction where the enzymes of the food come here and the food comes here, and then they mix right here. Now the big difference between a gastric bypass and a duodenal switch is the distance of what's called the common channel. So after the enzymes and the food come together at the lower connection, with a gastric bypass, we don't typically measure it, but it could be on the order of 10 or 12 feet or even more of intestine that are left after the connection. When we look at a duodenal switch surgery, and there's different variations, but we're typically talking about somewhere between 2 to 4 feet. So much less intestine is available where the food and the enzymes have mixed together. So there's much less surface or ability for your body to absorb nutrients. So where the gastric bypass is, I think, more an intestinally hormonal surgery, meaning that there's hormones that are released, and these hormones impact your set point, there really is not a significant amount of functional malabsorption, meaning if you eat food after a gastric bypass, you are able to absorb all of those calories that are in the food. You cannot say the same thing for a duodenal switch. Over that 2 to 4 feet, and sometimes people were making it even shorter than that, that some of the food that you eat will pass undigested through your GI tract, and that really has serious implications for vitamin absorption as well as for your lifestyle. So there's a new surgery that's gaining a lot of attention, and I think it also is really interesting. They really haven't even settled on a name. It's basically a cross between a duodenal switch and a mini gastric bypass. It's also known as a loop duodenal switch. And what's nice about it is that there's only one connection compared to 2 connections with a duodenal switch, so it's a little simpler procedure. And typically that common channel is longer, more in the area of 6 to 8 feet is what I'm seeing in the literature. So there's going to be more absorption and only one connection, but we still see a lot of the same effects of the duodenal switch in this procedure. It's called either the SIPS procedure, which stands for Stomach Intestinal Pylorus Sparing Procedure. Pylorus sparing because the food will still travel through the pylorus. There's some people who think that that really makes a big deal, a big difference in terms of what life is like and whether your intestines function normally. I'm not so sure that I fully agree with that. And the SADI procedure, which stands for single anastomosis duodenal interposition. And again, but really what these are is similar to a duodenal switch, but a slightly similar procedure. I think the most important thing about this is that this is experimental right now. There is not enough research for us to fully understand how this procedure is going to impact you. And if it's being done right now, as of 2018, our national society recommends that it's done within the confines of a research project rather than just a surgeon kind of offering it over to his patients. So the duodenal switch, without question, offers the most weight loss of any surgery that's performed today. It's better than the gastric bypass, and it's without question the best weight loss. It's also great weight loss durability. We've been doing the surgery since the 80s, and the weight stays off, and you can eat more. The sleeve that we do with the duodenal switch is not as narrow as the sleeve that we do when it's a primary surgery, and they do that intentionally so that people can eat enough to maintain their nutritional state because of that very short common channel limb where they can absorb their nutrients. So there's great durability, great weight loss. Patients can eat freely and really have to watch their diet, I think, less than with the other procedures. And it's been performed since the 80s. This really sounds like a miracle procedure. And from an efficacy perspective, it absolutely is. It's without question the best surgery that we have. It also is the most effective surgery for treating diabetes. If you've got very brittle diabetes, this offers you the best diabetes response compared to any other weight loss surgery. So again, it's looking like a perfect operation at this point until we look at the complications and the side effects. And this is why I've decided not to perform this procedure. And I can't tell you that I would never change my mind, especially if the SIPS or the SADI procedure, if the research shows that it can be done more safely and with less long-term issues, then I certainly would consider it. I tend to, in my practice, lag a little bit behind. I'm not an experimental surgeon. I like to look at the data, look at the research, learn from others, and offer the safest possible options rather than being the guy who's always offering the newest, greatest procedure. This is exciting and often tempting as a patient, but what I think you have to realize is that whenever things are being done that are new, we're not going to be very good at them. And if most procedures that are new do not end up becoming a well-recognized and frequently offered procedure. So you have to be very, very cautious with that. And I am personally, when I'm looking at the SADI or SIPS procedure, in terms of offering it to my patients. And I think if you're considering that, it's really important for you to recognize this is experimental and we don't have long-term data and we really don't know how this procedure is going to impact your life. So the duodenal switch has the highest complication rate of any procedure, easily twice, if not more, than the gastric bypass. And oftentimes it's still being offered as an open surgery. There are a lot of surgeons and a growing number of surgeons who are performing this laparoscopically, and it can be performed safely laparoscopically. But it does have a higher complication rate than any procedure in terms of bleeding, infection, and leak, and sepsis, and DVT, or blood clot, and pulmonary embolus, and all of these terrible things that can happen after these surgeries, but thankfully do so very infrequently. While the duodenal switch, it's higher than any of the other procedures. This, to me, is really probably the most concerning issue. With the other procedures, we really don't see any long-term significant vitamin deficiency issues, with the exception of iron, a little bit with the sleeve, a more substantial amount with the gastric bypass. But all of the other vitamins, like vitamin A and D and E and K, which are fat-soluble vitamins, and the B vitamins, they tend to be absorbed well over time, and deficiencies after surgery are very, very uncommon. Not so after a duodenal switch. Typically, the average duodenal switch patient will need to pay between $50 to $100 a month and take 8 to 10 vitamin tablets every day in order to maintain an appropriately nourished state with regards to to vitamins. Another thing is that you will have frequent bowel movements per day, on average 2 to 4 per day, but it may be 6 or 8 per day, and it will depend on what you eat. And patients often after the surgery have what I call the eat and run syndrome, which is that you eat a meal and then you run to the bathroom shortly after because you only have 2 feet or so of intestine to absorb the calories over, and so what you eat essentially runs right through you. Also, flatulence, gassiness, abdominal bloating is common after the surgery as well. So yes, we get great weight loss. There's less of the nutritional restrictions in terms of really having to watch your diet after a duodenal switch, which is fantastic, but life with a duodenal switch is not all that pleasant. Between the flatulence, the frequent bowel movements, the vitamin deficiencies, and these are not vitamin deficiencies where your doctor says, oh, you know, your level's low, let's bring it up. Like cholesterol. Someone says your cholesterol's high, let's bring it down. We understand that that's in order to prevent a heart attack, but nobody feels bad because they have high cholesterol. When you have significant vitamin deficiencies, like if you have vitamin A deficiency, you can develop night blindness. You can't see at night. And I have a few patients who are not able to drive at night because they can't see. They're younger people. They should have no problems driving at night, but they can't because they're vitamin A, they're so vitamin A deficient. And we're working like crazy having them take massive doses of vitamin A, but still are seeing some of these side effects. So these vitamin deficiencies cause health problems that affect your life. This is not just some blood work coming back and the doctor saying, you know, this is low, make sure you take this vitamin. This is going to impact how your day-to-day life. My experience with the duodenal switch is that it absolutely makes you thinner, but it does not make you healthier. You turn into someone who was suffering from diabetes and high blood pressure and obesity to someone who's now suffering from vitamin deficiencies and GI distress and essentially become frail and really don't have this kind of glow of good health. They don't feel good. They're not able to exercise vigorously. And they're just not in their best health. And I could kind of outline each of these individual items that make them sick, but really it's almost what we call a doorway diagnosis in medicine, which is when as soon as you walk into the door, you know exactly what's going on. And when I look at a lot of these duodenal switch patients, I recognize they don't look healthy. They don't look strong. They don't have a vitality to them that I see in my sleeve gastrectomy and my gastric bypass patients who are many years out from surgery. So it makes you thinner, but not healthier. And then finally, the SIPS or SADI or loop duodenal switch or whatever name we finally settle on with this procedure is new and experimental. It is promising, and I would not be surprised at all if it does become a more commonly performed and more commonly offered procedure. It still does have some of these negative side effects with the vitamin deficiencies and the frequent bowel movements that we see with the duodenal switch, but it's looking like it's going to be less so. So this procedure does have some legs and maybe something that's interesting, but as of now, 2018, it is experimental. And to undergo it means that you are being part of the research that is being done to determine whether this procedure really is a viable option, which again is important. We need people who are willing to participate in medical research, but at the same time, you must do so fully knowledgeable of what that means.